I mean, what else is there to achieve in life than that? Thank you, Paul. Thank you for all the work you do to build a stronger nation and a healthy democracy. The work of defending democracy was how I connected with Paul in the fall of 2017 on a tour of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta just before a Dolphins-Falcons game. And after just a few minutes with him and his wife, Chan, I realized he is actually a voting rights champion who just happens to be a former NFL commissioner. So, Paul, I'm grateful for your and Chan's friendship and support over the years, and look forward to continuing our work together in the years ahead. And thank you all for being here tonight for what really is a celebration of democracy and the people, all of us, who ensure the promise of democracy is real for every American. I want to thank the Brennan Center and thank you for recognizing our work in Michigan. I'm deeply honored to accept this award on behalf of not just other secretaries of state, but also election officials throughout our country who have worked every day in ways big and small to fulfill that simple promise held in the power of the vote for every American. I'm so grateful for the work that the Brennan Center does to help inform and support our work through nonpartisan research and legal advocacy that is squarely focused on reform, revitalization, and defense of our nation's system of democracy and justice. In fact, yes, thank you. Some of you in this room know, shortly after I was elected, one of my first stops was visiting the Brennan Center. I visited to discuss our work, our plans for Michigan, and I left with Jonathan Brater, who at the time was the Deputy Legal Counsel, and now he serves as Michigan's Director of Elections. Jonathan is here tonight along with Agogo Adeviye, who recently joined us from All Voting is Local and serves now as Michigan's Deputy Secretary of State. As Paul alluded to, I started my career in Montgomery, Alabama, investigating hate groups and hate crimes throughout the country with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it was there in Alabama, in Selma specifically, where I was instilled with a deep sense of responsibility and inspiration to continue the work of the foot soldiers who worked and marched and bled in Selma to ensure that the one person, one vote promise in our Constitution was a reality for everyone. It was so clear to me then, 25 years ago when I was there, as it is today, that that work is far from done. And I say this as the daughter of special education teachers who taught me at a young age that everyone must have a seat at the table if our educational system and our economy is going to function and flourish. I believe the best chance for equity, for everyone having equal access to opportunity in our country, begins and ends with equal access to the vote. And so, yes, you can applaud. So in 2020, secretaries of state were in the spotlight. We worked to protect the will of the people against an unprecedented, nationally coordinated effort to undo the accurate results of a presidential election. In Michigan, we met so many challenges that year, thanks in no small part to Jonathan Brater and so many others around this room and around this country who helped us in Michigan to modernize our voter registration system to ensure that every eligible citizen could register and vote, even on Election Day itself. We educated all citizens about their right under our state constitution to vote from home, sent absentee ballot request forms to every registered voter in the state, much to the ire of the former president, and we installed over 1,000 secure drop boxes all across Michigan to give voters a safe and reliable option to return their ballot on time. But as I often said, both when I was at RISE working with Paul and Stephen Ross and everyone here tonight, Troy Vincent and others, democracy is a team sport. So in 2020, we partnered with dozens of nonpartisan organizations, including all 4 of Detroit's major professional sports teams, to elevate the truth and ensure that every voter could have the confidence and clarity they needed to exercise their right to vote in the midst of a global pandemic. When the polls closed on election night, November 2020, it was indeed a moment of celebration. We had just administered a smooth, seamless, secure election in which more Michigan citizens had voted on both sides of the aisle than ever before in our state's history. It was a tremendous thing to be proud of. But then, in the days and weeks that followed, we battled an unprecedented, nationally coordinated effort to interfere with the tabulation of valid votes, to block the certification of the election results, and attempt to submit a false alternate slate of electors to the National Archives and to the United States Congress. We saw all of this escalate into the tragedy at our U.S. Capitol on January 6th. And through all of this, particularly on January 6th, it became abundantly clear that we were up against not just an effort to overturn the results of a legitimate presidential election. We were in a battle, as Michael said earlier tonight, over the future of democracy itself. Now, democracy prevailed in 2020, but it prevailed because people of integrity on both sides of the aisle followed the law, upheld our constitutional protections, and ensured that every valid vote was counted. As a result, many of us engaged in this work have faced threats, very real threats, to our safety and our lives for simply doing our jobs with integrity. Today's report, released by the Brennan Center, underscores how many of us have left the profession of election administration since 2020, and how universal and prevalent threats, harassment, and abuse have become just what we deal with now, all because of lies. A lot of you may know about the incident that happened outside my home shortly after the 2020 presidential election. It was close to 9 p.m. on a cold Saturday night in December. My then 4-year-old son and I were putting the finishing touches on a Christmas tree, and we were watching How the Grinch Stole Christmas and really just having a wonderful evening. And then suddenly dozens of armed individuals showed up on my doorstep. They grew in numbers over the course of an hour. They stood outside our home, waking my neighbors, shouting obscenities and graphic threats into bullhorns that everyone could hear. In a scene that would repeat itself in greater magnitude and escalate towards violent ends 1 month later at the United States Capitol, these men and women demanded that I come outside and show myself so that they could confront me about the results of the presidential election, results that were abundantly clear. As things unfolded that evening, I carried my young son upstairs, running bath water loudly to drown out the noise and the shouts of anger, to just create a sense of normalcy inside our home. And I concentrated on staying calm and focused so that he could at least have a sense of serenity in that night. But at the same time, I was acutely aware that in that moment, only one unarmed neighborhood security guard on my front porch stood between us and the growing crowd. Were things going to escalate? Were they going to attempt to enter my home? Would a stray bullet enter a ricochet into my son's bedroom? When would law enforcement arrive? And what would happen when they did? As all of these thoughts went through my mind, I also thought about what it meant to serve on the front lines of defending democracy. Was this what it meant, protecting my family against threats of violence at our doorstep, while trying simultaneously to protect the accurate results of a legitimate presidential election? And it was in that moment that I thought about John Lewis and others who stood on the front lines in Selma in 1965 at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, who chose not to cower but to march straight forward into a sea of Alabama state troopers armed with billy clubs and tear gas to demand that the promise of democracy be fulfilled for every citizen in our country. The threats and the hateful words that were shouted outside my home and echoed through our home that evening, I realized, were not just aimed at me. In fact, they weren't aimed at me at all. They were aimed at voters. They were aimed at our democracy. They were aimed at every person throughout history who has stood on the front lines to defend it. And while I couldn't control the fact that that evening dozens of angry individuals showed up outside my home, I couldn't stem the flow of misinformation into our democracy or deter the countless politicians, including a former president, who chose to deceive their supporters about the results of a safe and secure election to further their own agendas. But I also could control that I would not allow fear or threats to deter me or anyone else from protecting our elections and defending every voice and every vote. Because we must remember these threats against us as individuals doing our jobs, Alvin Bragg, they're threats to democracy. And the answer to the threats is the truth, the law, justice, history, and to know that the American people are on our side. The future of democracy will be determined by whether or not in this moment we do all we can to recognize the ongoing threats to election officials are threats to the entire fabric of who we are as Americans. They are threats to everything we fight for, everything this country was founded on. And therefore, we must respond by choosing in this moment to stand undeterred at the foot of the metaphorical Edmund Pettus Bridge today, and every day choose to keep going in service of who we are, the rights we stand for, and the democracy we seek to protect. One where every vote counts and where every voice is heard. One where our kids could go to school free from fear of gun violence. One where unarmed men and women of color are not terrorized or killed during a routine traffic stop. One where democracy thrives and justice prevails. That is the world I am fighting for. That is the world Justice Brennan fought for. That is the world we all must fight for together, and it starts and ends by fighting for our democracy. Thank you.